Of all of the questions I've been asked over the past few weeks, the most common one has definitely been, should I pull for Yoimiya? And honestly, that's pretty understandable. It's been over a year since her release, where she was received by a significant portion of the community as underwhelming and not worth the pickup. Anywhere you say anything about Yoimiya that could be seen as positive, someone will immediately let you know that's copium. Now, I've been maining Yoimiya for over a year, and I won't lie, her release was a bit of a mess, but there's some validity to both sides of the Yoimiya coin. Having mained her since her release and cleared Abyss with her every single rotation, even with a bunch of the clears before I had actually activated her constellations, I don't think she's that bad. But as always, opinions in the Genshin Impact community have to be black and white. There are only good and bad characters, good implies meta, and bad implies literally anything else. And she's certainly not a perfect character, but a lot of players also underestimate her potential. Yoimiya is a pretty interesting case for the waifu versus meta argument. Some would even say that she was the fuse that started the division of theory crafting from casual players. After all, Yoimiya was the first limited 5-star character to release that didn't have a place in the meta, being a strict downgrade in damage from other limited 5-stars in her role. Inazuma was essentially a balance patch, where Electra received buffs via new characters, and the only truly overpowered DPS was Ayaka, and many players absolutely despised that. It's actually pretty interesting. If you ask a player if they want power creep, they'll say no, but when a balanced character is released, that character is underwhelming. As always, you can't really please everyone, and so more niche characters are seen as bad. And though I don't feel like Yoimiya has a specific niche that she excels at over other characters, there's definitely things she can't do that other characters can. Part of the reason Yoimiya was poorly received was due to her being a strictly single target damage dealer. Her arrows are only able to make contact with one enemy at a time unless their hitboxes are literally inside of each other. Now, why did that happen? Honestly, nobody has any clue. Considering her entire character is based around fireworks which explode, there's not really any reason for her to not deal AoE damage. Now, this was different from your other damage dealing options. Most characters had built-in AoE damage, allowing them to hit multiple enemies at a time in close proximity. Even Hu Tao, a character whose damage hitbox is pretty small, can hit multiple enemies at the same time. And what this essentially means for Yoimiya is that she needs to deal more damage than Hu Tao at similar investment to compensate for being single target only. Otherwise, her damage can't be competitive. But the problem is that even in only single target, Yoimiya's damage output at Constellation 0 is less than that of Hu Tao's. In single target situations, the damage dealers aren't actually that far off. But as soon as there are 2 enemies on the field, Yoimiya falls off massively in comparison. And that's not even mentioning how buggy her arrow tracking was at the start. There was a small patch that helped fix it a fair bit, but you can still miss arrows in 2.8 sometimes. So when players began to figure out that her damage had a low ceiling due to single target, combined with the fact that sometimes she missed arrows, she was seen as the worst 5-star release. And with news outlets, theory crafters, and content creators all spouting the same negativity about Yoimiya, it hurt her sales massively and created a negative mindset surrounding the character, creating the first widespread instance of Genshin PvP. Players would take to comment sections, Discord, Twitter, and Twitch all in the hopes of winning the idea that my character is better than your copium Yoimiya. And I think what made this really tough is that a lot of players who pulled Yoimiya said that she didn't really need any buffs or fixes or anything, while there were actively players who thought Yoimiya was bad, who wanted her to get better, who were pushing for buffs, who were pushing for fixes, and that contributed to the PvP as well. Some players were just defending the character, not realizing that it actually does more harm than good to pretend like the character didn't have any issues at all. But with that being said, the issues were pretty overblown. If this sounds familiar, you may be a Kokomi player. At the end of the day, most people don't really care how you play the game, but the few people that do care for some reason are really loud about it. And like modern politics in the United States of America, both sides are pretty dang divided, and all in all, it just makes everything look worse. Now, this isn't the only reason she didn't sell well. Her banner was sandwiched between Ayaka, who had players waiting for over a year, and Raiden, who had Bulbasaur. Despite Yoimiya having a super cute character design, her looks weren't enough to compensate for her damage for a lot of players. And especially since she was sandwiched between 2 amazing units, things looked really bad for her. Just because a character is in a worse place damage-wise than others doesn't mean that all hope is lost though. There are still massive communities surrounding Yoimiya that are working to make her the best she can be, and with the right setups, she's really not even that bad. Genshin Impact is all about getting carried by supports and off-field damage dealers anyways. As the community has settled and calmed calmed down about the Yoimiya fiasco, a lot of players who were skeptical about her are now considering wishing for her. Crazy, right? Who would have thought that doom posting and negative public opinion would be so off-putting? If you're one of those players, or even just a new player that's interested in potentially picking her up, it's important to know a few things about Yoimiya. As previously discussed, she's strictly single target. If you're fighting multiple enemies, using her will be harder than using Hu Tao or even Xiangling, who's a free 4-star character. She also doesn't deal as much damage as the other pyro options, with the exception of Diluc, where she's actually pretty competitive. She gets animation locked while shooting, just like other bow-based characters, but due to her normal attack scalings getting much higher by the 5th attack, and her wanting to be used in vaporized teams sometimes, you practically have to run a shield if you want to maximize her damage, which ultimately can limit her team setups. Otherwise, if you have to dodge mid-combo with Xingqiu, Yelan, or Kokomi applying Hydro, you can begin to vaporize her weaker attacks instead of her strong ones, since the aura and ICD will be offset. And because internal cooldown is based on the enemy's hits rather than your actual attacks, Yoimiya's vaporize hits will likely get offset anyways, meaning her damage from time to time can vary. Now, in the patch where Ayato was released, a new artifact set came out that looked promising for Yoimiya. The Echo set had an RNG chance to buff normal attacks, and that chance of buffing each normal attack would get higher as you didn't get the buff. And in theory, that seems like a huge Yoimiya buff, but the problem is that the Echo set is actually based off of your ping. I'll make an entire other video about this, so stay tuned if you want to see it, but essentially the Echo set didn't really change anything for Yoimiya. She does have a lot of issues in comparison to other units. After all, she's a pretty chaotic personality. It would make sense that her kit's pretty chaotic too. But there's also still benefits to using someone like Yoimiya as well. For example, her weapon choices are pretty free-to-play friendly. Though Rust is a gacha-based weapon, it's still a 4-star and within the realm of possibility for free-to-play players. Rust at higher refinements with a crit setup on your artifacts is really competitive with Yoimiya's signature weapon, Thundering Pulse. You don't need Thundering Pulse to get value out of Yoimiya, and if you're not able to get Rust, you can always opt for Hamayumi or Prototype Crescent, the craftable weapons. All 4 of those weapons get a lot of value on her. On top of her weapons being free-to-play friendly though, she works really well with a lot of 4-star units. A few of her best teams are actually made up of all 4-stars or just one other 5-star, and one of them features Fischl, who's a free-to-play unit that you can grab right now as a part of the Golden Apple Archipelago event. You can also fix her AoE problems with certain teams as well. Sure, Yoimiya's damage will never be true area damage, but with the right team setup, you can compensate with Overload and some AoE supports, which will help fix a lot of Yoimiya's problems. Once again, Genshin Impact gets carried by supports anyways. Now, one thing a lot of players don't talk about is Yoimiya's burst. A lot of times, even though the damage is fairly low compared to Yoimiya's on-field damage, the fact that it gives a 10% attack buff to your team makes it so that when Yoimiya is off-field, she's still providing support to your team, even if it's minimal. Another thing to consider is that Yoimiya is a primarily ranged character, which means that you don't have to always be in melee range. And for bosses and enemies that are flying, out of reach, or move away from you, you can still hit them a lot of the time. But in my past year of maining Yoimiya, there's one thing that I've found to be the absolute best thing about her. Yoimiya is incredibly easy to play. There's not many characters that let you press one button and spam tap or click to auto-target and defeat enemies. I've found that on mobile in particular, where I have a lot of skill issue, she's super easy, since I don't even have to do any aiming or even repositioning a lot of the time. Of all of the things Yoimiya brings to the table that sets her apart from other pyros in Genshin, it's that she deals damage at range and she's incredibly easy to play. Despite her pretty rough launch, Yoimiya still gets used by those who pulled her. And while you could argue that it's just because they pulled the character because they really like her aesthetic or they like her attitude or whatever it may be, I doubt that players would still be using her if she was a truly bad character that made content harder. Her damage is absolutely lower than other pyro damage dealers. There's some she beats out, but it's kind of inevitable because she can't hit multiple enemies at the same time. But once again, most of Yoimiya's problems you can fix with proper team building or just proper knowledge of the game. The way that I see it, there are 2 schools of thought when it comes to theory crafting. One is the idea that you should only wish for characters that are good and meta, because gacha games are predatory and saving money is important. If you want to be able to clear all the content very easily with strong characters, then you're probably not pulling for off-meta units. The other is the idea of finding the best way to play suboptimal characters so that they can be viable in the harder content. Tons of players know Xiangling is broken, tons of players know Kazuha is broken, but sometimes they just want to look at a pretty character on screen and play the game with that character. If you subscribe to the first idea that you should only pull for characters based on strength, then I can't really recommend pulling for Yoimiya because in all honesty, she's not a meta-defining unit. But if you don't really care about that, then the choice was clear from the start. You didn't even need to watch this video. She's clearly good enough enough, and with proper investment in team building, she's plenty capable of getting you through the high-end content, which at the moment is only Spiral Abyss. If you don't even do Spiral Abyss, then there's no reason not to pull her if you like her. There will always be players that say not to pull for certain units because they're bad, and there will always be players that want to pull those units so they can play them, because at the end of the day, having fun is the most important thing, and not everyone thinks that playing meta is the most fun thing to do. And both of these things will happen every single time a character that's not top meta comes out, but don't let that dissuade you if you want the character. One more important thing to think about though is that with Dendro coming soon, this is all subject to change. From my knowledge in the current game, burning doesn't seem like it's gonna be all that strong, and for someone like Yoimiya who only applies single target damage, combined with a bunch of new Electro reactions coming, it's very possible that she'll get put on the back burner. So if you're looking for a character that's future proof, I can't really promise you that. As of right now, she has fairly high single target damage, good team flexibility, ranged damage, and she's really easy to play. And if that's what you're looking for in a character, she's a great pull. And if you're looking for a super future proof character, or one that fits into the top meta teams, you may want to wait for the next run just to see what's coming in Sumeru. And keep in mind, you can always wait until 1 week before the patch when they release the dev stream that's going to show us some of the new characters coming out soon. So if you're really on the fence, just wait until then. Thanks for watching, everyone. As always, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate if you left a like and subscribe to the channel. We're actually almost all the way to 100k subscribers, and it would be super awesome if we could get there before the end of summer. I go live a few days a week at twitch.tv/Braxophone, and we'll be doing a huge stream the day that Yoimiya goes live, where I'll be pulling on viewer accounts and pulling for Yoimiya on my free-to-play account. So if you want to come hang out, make sure to go follow. As always, good luck on your Yoimiya pulls, and I'll catch you later.